The Keeper of the Drowned Chapel, a tale in two parts, Part 2. The Depths Ascendant. The storyteller returns from shadow. Welcome back, brave reader, to the continuation of our descent into nightmare. I am, as before, Edgar Allan Poe, that melancholy specter who traffics in terror and trades in the currency of dread. You have journeyed with our narrator through his initial encounter with the Drowned Chapel, witnessed his confrontation with forces beyond mortal comprehension, and seen his desperate escape from those submarine horrors. But escape, dear reader, is an illusion when dealing with entities whose existence predates the very concept of mercy. When we last departed our narrator's company, he had fled Ravenshollow, believing himself free of the chapel's influence. The structure itself had sunk into an abyss from which, surely, nothing could return. But you and I know better, don't we? We understand that some doors once opened can never truly close. Some songs once heard echo forever in the chambers of the mind. Let us rejoin our tormented protagonist as his story reaches its inexorable, terrible conclusion. 5 years passed. 5 years in which I attempted to rebuild the shattered remnants of my life, to convince myself that the events at Ravenshollow had been nothing more than fevered dreams born of isolation and overindulgence in laudanum. I moved frequently, never remaining in one city for more than a few months, always seeking distance from the ocean. I settled finally in a small town in western Pennsylvania, far from any significant body of water, where I secured employment as a teacher of languages at a modest academy. I did not write during those years. How could I? Every time I put pen to paper, I found myself transcribing those alien symbols, drawing elaborate diagrams of impossible architecture, scribing fragments of the song in musical notation that made my students weep when they accidentally glimpsed it. I destroyed these documents as quickly as I produced them, burning them in my fireplace and scattering the ashes. But still they came, emerging from my unconscious mind like swimmers rising from dark depths. I took a wife, sweet Martha, daughter of the academy's headmaster, a gentle soul who asked few questions about my past, and accepted my occasional episodes of night terrors with patient understanding. We married in the spring of 1852, and for a brief period, I dared to believe that normalcy might be possible, that love might serve as an anchor against the calling that still whispered in my dreams. I was, of course, deluding myself. The dreams grew worse after the wedding. Each night I descended into those submarine vaults, walked those impossible corridors, sat among the congregation of the drowned. The keeper was always there, her black eyes reflecting nothing, her smile promising an end to struggle. "You cannot run from what you are," she would say. "You breathed the water, you heard the true song. You are already one of us." I would wake screaming, clutching Martha, who would soothe me with soft words and cool cloths upon my fevered brow. But I could see the concern growing in her eyes, could hear the whispered consultations between her and her father. They thought me afflicted with some disorder of the mind, and perhaps they were right. Perhaps madness was the kindest explanation for what I had become. It was in late October of that year, 5 years to the day after my flight from Ravenshollow, that the chapel found me. The town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, possessed a single distinguishing feature: a limestone quarry that had been excavated over decades, creating a deep pit that had filled with groundwater to form an artificial lake. The locals called it Quarry Lake and used it for recreation in the summer months, though they avoided it after dark, claiming the water was too cold for swimming and the depths too dangerous. I had avoided the quarry since my arrival, some instinctive aversion keeping me away from its waters. But on that October evening, drawn by a compulsion I could not resist, I walked to its edge. The moon was full as it had been that night 5 years ago. Its light painted the quarry water with silver, and beneath that silver surface I saw the glow, phosphorescent green, pulsing like a heartbeat. "No," I whispered, the word torn from my lips. "No, it cannot be." But it was. The Drowned Chapel had risen again, not from the ocean floor, but from the depths of this inland lake, drawn by my presence like a lodestone to iron. I could see its outline beneath the water, those Gothic spires, those grotesque gargoyles, that open door beckoning me home. I turned to flee, but found I could not move my feet. The calling had me now, truly had me, and resistance was futile. I watched in horror as my body began to walk toward the water's edge, my mind screaming protests that my flesh would not obey. "Stop fighting," came a voice from behind me, I managed to turn my head enough to see her, the keeper, standing on the path I had walked, her pale form luminescent in the moonlight. You were always going to return. From the moment you entered the chapel, your fate was sealed. You are the door's property now. You said I could resist, I gasped. I said you must try to resist. I never said you could succeed. She moved closer, and I saw that she had changed. Her form was less substantial now, more translucent, as if she were becoming one with the water vapor in the air. I am fading, you see. 5 years of existing without the chapel's full power has diminished me. But now that it has risen again, now that it has you, I will be restored. And you will take your rightful place. My wife, I managed to say. Martha. She will come looking for me. The keeper's expression shifted into something that might have been pity. Then she will hear the calling too. The door is hungry, and it has been denied for too long. Anyone who comes seeking you will join the choir. Is that what you want? For her to share your fate? The thought of Martha, sweet Martha, trapped in those pews with the congregation of the drowned, her voice added to that maddening song, broke something within me. Not my will that had already been shattered, but it crystallized my resolve. If I could not save myself, perhaps I could save her. What must I do? I asked. To keep her safe. To keep others safe? The keeper studied me with those bottomless black eyes. Give yourself willingly. Complete the transformation. Become not merely a member of the choir, but a true servant of the deep. The door requires a guardian on this side of the veil, someone to watch and wait and prepare the way for the return of the old gods. I have served for over 2 centuries. It is time for my watch to end. And if I refuse, then the door will take you anyway, but slowly over weeks and months, and everyone you love will be drawn in with you. Your wife, her family, your students. The entire town will hear the calling, and they will come. She gestured to the glowing water. Choose quickly. The tide waits for no one, even in a landlocked lake. What would you have done, dear reader? Faced with such a choice, would you have found some heroic alternative? Some clever solution that preserved both your humanity and the lives of those you loved? I confess, I searched desperately for such an option, my mind racing through possibilities even as my traitorous body continued its inexorable march toward the water. But in the end, I chose sacrifice. I accept, I said, the words like ashes in my mouth. I will serve, I will be the guardian, but you must swear by whatever dark powers govern this place, that Martha and the others will be safe, that the chapel will not call to them. The keeper's smile was terrible in its triumph. I swear it, the door will have its guardian and the rest will be spared for now. She extended a pale hand toward me. Come then, let us complete what was begun 5 years ago. I took her hand, and her flesh was cold as the depths of the ocean, cold as the space between stars. She led me into the water, and I waded in without hesitation, feeling the quarry's chill seep into my bones. When the water closed over my head, I breathed it in as I had before, and it filled my lungs like memories of drowning. We descended together through the illuminated water, past schools of pale fish that had never seen sunlight, past stones carved with symbols that predated human language. The chapel rose to meet us, and its door yawned wide, and the song poured forth in a torrent of inhuman harmony. The congregation was smaller now. Perhaps 20 souls sat in those accursed pews, their bodies in various stages of transformation. Some were relatively fresh, their features still recognizable as human. Others had begun the change, their flesh taking on a greenish cast, their eyes darkening, their fingers growing webbed. And some, like my cousin Edmund, were almost indistinguishable from the stones themselves, their forms half merged with the pews they occupied. There, the keeper said, pointing to a position beside the altar, not in the pews with the others, but standing, alert, aware. That is where you will serve. You will retain your consciousness, your memories, your sense of self, but you will belong to the door, bound to it as surely as these stones are bound to one another. And you? I asked. I will finally rest. I will join the stones, add my voice to the song, and know peace for the first time in 200 years. She released my hand and moved toward the altar, her form already beginning to dissolve into the water itself. Guard the door well. The old gods are patient, but they do not forget. One day, when the stars align and the barriers grow thin enough, the door will open fully and they will return. Until then, you are the keeper. And with those words, she was gone, dissolving into streamers of phosphorescent mist that were absorbed into the very walls of the chapel. I heard her voice join the song, adding a new layer to that eternal melody, and I understood that she had finally achieved what she had desired: oblivion within the collective, an end to individual consciousness. I stood alone beside the altar, feeling the change beginning within me. It was not painful exactly, but deeply, profoundly wrong. I could sense my cellular structure altering, adapting to the water, to the darkness, to the impossible physics of this place between worlds. My eyes began to change first, the pupils expanding until there was no white left, only black mirrors that reflected the green glow of the chapel. My skin took on a pallor like that of something that had never seen sunlight. And in my mind, I felt the presence of the door, vast and alien, claiming me as its property. But I retained my thoughts as the keeper had promised. I remained myself, even as I became something other than human. And in that retention of consciousness lay both blessing and curse. For I would remember everything, every moment of my former life, every face, every joy, while being forever barred from experiencing them again. Time moved strangely in the chapel, just as the first keeper had warned. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The tide, for there was a tide, even in this landlocked lake, drawn by forces that had nothing to do with the moon, carried the chapel up and down, concealing it and revealing it in cycles that followed no earthly pattern. I watched the congregation in their pews, singing their endless song, and gradually came to know them. There was the young woman who had gone swimming one night against all warnings, drawn by dreams she could not resist. There was the old fisherman who had spent decades searching for the lake's legendary giant catfish, only to find something far larger and far worse. There was the priest who had come to perform an exorcism and discovered too late that some demons cannot be cast out, they can only be served. And there was Edmund, my cousin, still dimly present in the front pew, his features now more stone than flesh. Sometimes I thought I saw recognition flicker in what remained of his eyes, a silent accusation. You could have saved me. You could have warned me. But you came to Ravenshollow for your selfish solitude, and it cost me everything. I tried to make amends in the only way I could. I became diligent in my duties as keeper. When curiosity seekers came too close to the water's edge, I drove them away with visions of horror, projecting into their minds glimpses of what awaited them should they continue. When children played too near the quarry, I manipulated the water itself, creating currents and cold spots that sent them fleeing to their mothers. I became the guardian I had promised to be, protecting the innocent from the calling even as I served the door that would devour them all. But protection was not the door's purpose, and I learned that my service demanded more than merely turning away the curious. The door needed to feed. The knowledge came to me slowly, seeping into my consciousness like water through cracks in a dam. The congregation could not sustain themselves indefinitely on the passive energy of the tidal confluence. They required active sustenance, the life force, the very souls of living beings. This was why the chapel relocated, following the keeper from place to place. It was a predator, and it needed hunting grounds. At first, I was able to satisfy its hunger with animals. Fish that swam too close to the glowing water would be drawn in, and I would offer them to the altar, watching as the phosphorescent slime consumed them, breaking down not just their bodies but their essential life energy. Small sacrifices, I told myself, necessary to protect the larger population. But the door was insatiable, and as time passed it demanded more. I resisted. God knows I resisted. I would stand beside the altar, feeling the hunger emanating from the stones, from the very structure of the chapel, and I would refuse to amplify the calling. I would use what power I possessed as keeper to muffle the song, to prevent it from reaching beyond the immediate area of the quarry. The door punished me for my disobedience. The pain was unlike anything I had experienced in my mortal life. It was as if the chapel itself turned against me, the stones pressing in from all sides, the water growing acidic, burning my transformed flesh. The congregation's song became a shriek of rage that reverberated through every cell of my body. And in my mind, I heard the voice of the entities beyond the veil, the old gods, the things that lurked in the deepest trenches, promising torments that would last for eons if I did not fulfill my purpose. I held out for 3 days. On the 4th, I surrendered. I opened myself fully to the door, allowed its hunger to flow through me, and sent the calling forth with all the power at my command. It rippled out across Millbrook like an invisible wave, touching the minds of the susceptible, the curious, the spiritually hungry. And they came. Over the course of a month, 7 people vanished from Millbrook. The town was in uproar, the authorities baffled. Search parties dragged the quarry, but found nothing. How could they? The chapel was hidden in depths beyond their reach, in dimensions perpendicular to their understanding. The 7 who came joined the congregation. I watched as they took their places in the pews, as their mouths opened to sing songs they did not know, as the slow transformation began that would eventually incorporate them into the stones themselves. And I hated myself. I hated what I had become, what I had allowed myself to become. But I was powerless to stop it. The door had won. It had always been going to win. 10 years passed in this manner. 10 years in which I lured the innocent to their doom, fed them to the insatiable hunger of the door, and watched as the congregation grew. The chapel moved 3 times during that decade, rising in different lakes, different rivers, always following me as I desperately tried to escape it, to find some place where it could not manifest. But I learned the terrible truth. The door was not bound to any single location. It was bound to me. I was the anchor, the focal point through which it manifested in our world. Wherever I went, it would follow, and the cycle would begin anew. I contemplated suicide, of course. Many times I stood at the shore of whatever body of water currently concealed the chapel, considering whether to walk into the depths and simply never emerge. But the door had anticipated this. I discovered that I could not die, not truly. My body had been too thoroughly transformed, too completely integrated into the chapel's existence. I could be damaged, could experience pain, but I could not cease to be. I was immortal, and it was the cruelest joke of all. It was during my time in northern Michigan, at a remote lake where the chapel had surfaced for the 3rd time, that Martha found me. I had believed her safe, believed that my sacrifice had protected her from the calling. And indeed it had. She had never heard the song, never felt the compulsion to seek the chapel. But she had heard stories, rumors of a pale figure seen near various bodies of water. A man matching my description who seemed not to age, who vanished whenever authorities approached. She had spent 10 years following these rumors, tracking me across the country with a determination born of love and loss. And now she stood on the shore of Lake Superior, calling my name into the night. James, her voice carried across the water, and I heard it from my position beside the altar, 70 feet below the surface. James, I know you're there. I know what happened. Come back to me. I could have hidden. I could have allowed her to grow frustrated and eventually leave. But hearing her voice, sweet Martha's voice, unchanged by the years that had transformed me into something monstrous, broke the last remnants of my resistance. I rose from the depths. She gasped when she saw me, and I could not blame her. I had seen my reflection in the still water often enough to know what I had become. My skin was the color of things found on the ocean floor, mottled with patterns like those of deep-sea fish. My eyes were black and reflective, catching and distorting the moonlight. My fingers had grown long and slightly webbed, and when I opened my mouth to speak, I revealed teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. But she did not flee. Martha had always been braver than she appeared. "What have they done to you?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I did it to myself," I said, my voice rough from disuse. I had not spoken aloud in years, communicating with the door through thought alone. "To protect you, to keep the calling from claiming you and everyone else in Millbrook. Protect me. James, you abandoned me. I thought you were dead. Your father-in-law died thinking you had gone mad and drowned yourself." The words struck me like physical blows. In my self-absorption, in my focus on serving the door and managing its hunger, I had not considered what my disappearance had cost her. She had mourned me, grieved for me, all while I had been. What? Playing the martyr, wallowing in my own damnation. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words were pitifully inadequate. "Martha, you must leave this place. You must forget you ever saw me. The door." "I don't care about any door," she said fiercely. "I care about my husband, the man I married, the man I loved. Is he still in there? Can he be saved? Could I?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized with a start that I had never truly considered it. I had accepted my role as keeper, had allowed the door to define my existence, had convinced myself that there was no alternative. But what if there was? What if the transformation could be reversed, the binding broken? Before I could answer, I felt it, the door's hunger stirring in response to Martha's presence. It had tasted her through me, sensed her connection to me, and it wanted her. Not as a sacrifice, not as a member of the congregation, but as leverage, as a way to ensure my complete obedience. "You need to run," I said urgently. "Now, Martha, run and don't look back." But it was too late. The calling burst forth from the chapel with such force that it created actual waves upon the lake's surface. Martha's eyes glazed over, and she took a step toward the water. "No," I lunged forward, grabbing her arm, breaking the compulsion through physical contact. She blinked, confused, and I saw the moment when she understood what had almost happened. "It's trying to take me," she said. "Yes, and I can't stop it, not permanently. Martha, please." "Then we'll stop it together," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Tell me how. There must be a way to destroy this thing, to break its hold on you." I almost laughed. "I've had 10 years to search for such a method. There is none. The door is eternal. It exists beyond our conventional understanding of time and space. It cannot be destroyed." "But it can be closed," she said, and I saw in her eyes a fierce intelligence that I had forgotten, that I had underestimated during our brief marriage. "Every door can be closed, James. You told me yourself that the original congregation tried to open it fully and failed. They became part of it instead. What if? What if someone became part of it deliberately from the inside? What if someone closed it from within?" Her words sparked a memory, something the first keeper had said back in Ravenshollow 5 years. No, 15 years ago now. Time was so confusing. She had mentioned that the congregation made mistakes in their ritual, that instead of opening the door fully, they had become part of it. What if that wasn't a failure? What if it was the only defense the universe possessed against such an intrusion? When the old gods had tried to force their way through, reality itself had responded by incorporating the would-be openers into the structure of the door, effectively jamming it in a partially open state. Not fully closed, but not fully open either. And I was the keeper, the guardian on this side. I was the mechanism that kept the door in its current state, that maintained the partial opening. If I were to truly join the congregation, to surrender my individual consciousness and become part of the collective as the first keeper had done, would the door be forced more firmly shut? Or would it simply claim Martha as the new keeper and the cycle would continue? I voiced this concern aloud, and Martha nodded slowly. "Then we both go," she said, "together. If we join the congregation simultaneously, if we both become part of the door's structure, there will be no one left to serve as keeper. The door will have no anchor in this world." "You don't know what you're suggesting," I said. "To join the congregation is to lose yourself, to become nothing more than a voice in an eternal song. Your individuality, your memories, your soul, all of it dissolved into the collective. It's a fate worse than death." "Is it worse than watching you suffer for eternity?" she countered. "Is it worse than knowing this thing will continue to claim innocent victims year after year, century after century? James, I didn't spend 10 years tracking you across the country just to walk away now. If this is the only way to stop it, then I'm willing to pay that price." "Are you?" I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the fragile girl I had married, but a woman of extraordinary courage and determination. She knew what she was offering, understood the sacrifice it entailed, and she was prepared to make it. For me, for all the future victims of the door, how could I do less? "Yes," I said. "God help us both, but yes." We made our preparations quickly, knowing that any delay might weaken our resolve or give the door opportunity to prevent us. I explained what would happen, how the transformation would progress, how the song would feel as it took control of our vocal cords and minds. Martha listened intently, her face pale but determined. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I stopped my own transformation halfway, but Martha, there's one more thing you need to understand. If this doesn't work, if the door simply claims us both and finds a new keeper, we'll have damned ourselves for nothing. We'll spend eternity as part of that congregation, fully aware of our failure. Then we'll make sure it works," she said simply, and took my webbed hand in hers. Together we walked into the water. The chapel rose to meet us, its glow intensifying as it sensed the opportunity. The door yawned wide, eager to swallow us both. But as we descended toward it, I reached out with the power I possessed as keeper, not to amplify the calling, but to shape it, to direct it inward rather than outward. The congregation's song changed, becoming confused, discordant. They were not accustomed to having their keeper act against the door's interests. The chapel itself seemed to convulse around us, the stones grinding against each other, the water churning with sudden currents. We passed through the doorway, and I led Martha to the only two empty spaces left in the pews, the front row beside Edmund. My cousin's form was now almost completely stone, but I thought I saw something in what remained of his eyes. Recognition and perhaps hope. "Forgive me," I whispered to him. "Forgive me for not saving you." Then Martha and I sat down together, our hands still clasped, and we opened our mouths to sing. The song poured into us, through us, overwhelming our individual thoughts with its alien harmonies. I felt my consciousness begin to fragment, to dissolve into the collective as pieces of me. Memories, personality traits, hopes, and fears were stripped away and absorbed into the greater whole. Beside me, I sensed Martha undergoing the same transformation, her essence joining with mine in a way more intimate and complete than any physical union could ever be. But we fought to retain one thought, one purpose: close. As our bodies began their final transformation into stone, as our voices joined the eternal choir, we pushed that thought into the very structure of the chapel, into the door itself. We drove it like a wedge between worlds, using the last vestiges of our individual will to force the opening shut. The chapel shuddered. The congregation's song reached a crescendo of such intensity that it shattered the water into foam. And the old gods, sensing their doorway closing, reached through from the other side, their vast tentacles of thought, and were trying to prevent what we had begun. But there were now 29 souls in the congregation, all focused on a single purpose. 29 wills, however diminished, combined into one overwhelming force. And the door, which had been jammed partially open for over 2 centuries, finally began to close. It did not happen instantly. It was not some dramatic magical effect where light flared and the chapel vanished in an explosion of released energy. Instead, it was gradual, inexorable, like continental drift or the slow erosion of mountains. The phosphorescent glow began to dim. The impossible angles of the architecture started to conform more closely to Euclidean geometry. The water that had seemed to defy physics grew cold and normal once more. And the calling, that terrible, seductive calling that had drawn so many to their doom, faded to a whisper, then to silence. On the shore of Lake Superior, investigators would later find 2 bodies washed up on the rocks. A middle-aged woman and a pale, strange-looking man who matched descriptions of several missing persons from various states. They would note that the bodies were holding hands, their expressions peaceful despite the apparent drowning. They would never know that these 2 souls had saved countless others from fates worse than death. And where am I now, you ask? How can I tell you this tale if I dissolved into the collective, if I became part of the stones of the Drowned Chapel? The truth is, I do not fully understand it myself. When the door closed, not perfectly, not completely, for such doors can never be entirely sealed but closed enough, something unexpected occurred. The congregation, its purpose fulfilled, began to dissipate. Those who had been absorbed into the stones most completely were released entirely, their souls finally free to move on to whatever afterlife awaits us. Those who had retained more of their individuality, like Edmund and the first keeper, found themselves in a kind of liminal space, neither fully alive nor fully dead, but no longer bound to the chapel. Martha and I were different still. We had closed the door while still partaking of both worlds, human enough to have individual will, transformed enough to access the chapel's power. When the structure collapsed, we found ourselves cast back into the mortal world, changed irrevocably but alive. We emerged from Lake Superior that dawn, naked and shivering, our bodies almost completely human once more save for small traces. A slight webbing between my fingers that never quite vanished, an occasional green cast to Martha's eyes when the moonlight strikes them just so. We stole clothes from a lakeside cabin and began the long journey toward something resembling normal life. That was 30 years ago. We are old now, Martha and I, though we age more slowly than we should. We have lived quietly, moving frequently, always staying far from large bodies of water. We have never spoken of what happened to anyone who would believe us. We have never returned to Millbrook or Ravenshollow, though I understand both towns still exist, their residents blissfully unaware of how close they came to becoming feeding grounds for entities beyond human comprehension. But we are not free, not truly. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the tide is high, and yes, there are tides even in landlocked places, tides of influence and power that most people never perceive, I hear the song. Faint, distant, barely perceptible, but there. The door is closed, but it is not locked. It cannot be locked. And somewhere in some lake or ocean or reservoir, I know the chapel waits, dormant but not destroyed. And I know, with the certainty of the damned, that one day it will rise again. Perhaps not in my lifetime, perhaps not for centuries, but it will rise. The old gods are patient, you see. They have existed for eons, and they will exist for eons more. A few hundred years of dormancy means nothing to them. They will wait until the barriers between worlds grow thin enough, until some curious soul stumbles upon the chapel in its slumber and accidentally awakens it. And when that happens, there will be no keeper to guard the door, no congregation to jam it shut. There will be only the calling and the hunger and the slow, inexorable opening of a doorway that should remain sealed forever. This is why I write this account. This is why I have spent the last year setting down every detail of my ordeal, every warning I can provide. Because someday, maybe next year, maybe next century, someone will encounter the Drowned Chapel. And when they do, they must be prepared. They must understand what they face and what must be done. The door can be closed, but only through absolute sacrifice. Only by becoming part of the structure itself, by joining the congregation and turning their combined will against the opening. One person alone cannot do it. I tried, and I merely became the door's servant. But two souls, acting in concert, driven by love or duty or simple desperate courage, can force the door shut for a time. How long will our closure last? I do not know. The first keeper held her vigil for 2 centuries before I inadvertently released the door by destroying the book. Perhaps our closure will last as long, perhaps longer. Perhaps, if we were more complete in our joining than I believe, the door will remain shut permanently. But I doubt it. I have seen what lurks beyond that threshold, have felt the vastness of those alien intelligences. They will not be denied forever. They will find a way through, if not in this age, then in the next. The ocean covers 3/4 of our world, and in its depths are trenches we have never explored, pressures we cannot withstand, darkness we cannot penetrate. And in that darkness the old gods wait. They are patient, they are eternal, and one day they will return. Epilogue. I end this narrative as the October wind howls outside our cottage, a new cottage far from any ocean, built on high ground where no water collects. Martha sits beside me, reading by lamplight, her presence a comfort against the gathering dark. We are content after a fashion. We have made a life together despite everything. But tonight, as Halloween approaches and the veil between worlds grows thin, I feel a familiar stirring in my blood. The webbing between my fingers has grown more pronounced, and Martha tells me that my eyes are darker than usual, reflecting the lamplight in ways that are not quite right. The song is louder tonight, not loud enough to compel, not yet, but growing. And I wonder if perhaps our closure was not as complete as we hoped. I wonder if somewhere in some body of water we have never seen, the chapel is beginning to stir. If you are reading this, if these pages have somehow survived and reached you, then learn from my mistakes. Stay away from places where water and darkness meet. Avoid structures that seem wrong, that seem to exist in angles your eye cannot quite follow. And if you ever hear singing in the night, singing that speaks to something deep and primitive in your soul, do not answer. Do not investigate. Do not convince yourself it is merely the wind or your imagination. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. And pray that the Drowned Chapel remains dormant for one more generation, one more century. Pray that when it rises again, there will be souls brave enough to close the door once more. And pray above all that you are not one of them, for the calling never truly ends, the song never truly fades, and the deep, the unfathomable deep is always hungry, always. The end, a final word from the chronicler of darkness. Thus concludes our tale, dear reader. You have journeyed with us through madness and terror, through sacrifice and slim redemption. You have seen the depths to which human curiosity can lead, and the heights to which human courage can rise. But most importantly, you have been warned. The ocean keeps its secrets, but sometimes those secrets seek us out. Be vigilant, be wary. And remember that there are doors in this world that were never meant to be opened, and once ajar, they may never fully close. Until we meet again in the shadows, I remain your faithful servant in the art of dread, Edgar Allan Poe. If this tale has chilled your blood and quickened your pulse, if you have found yourself unable to look away from the horrors herein described, then I humbly request, press the like button to show your appreciation. Subscribe so that you might be alerted to future tales from beyond the veil, and ring the bell for notifications lest you miss the next descent into darkness. Share this story with those brave enough to endure it, but do so with caution, for some tales once heard can never be forgotten. And on quiet nights when you hear singing in the distance, you might wonder if it is merely the wind. Or something far worse. Sleep well, dear reader, if you can.